Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the beginning of a story no one could ever imagine. I still remember the sound of the rain before I remember his face. It had started just after the final school bell rang, turning a bright autumn afternoon into a curtain of gray skies and shimmering sidewalks. Parents hurried toward the elementary school entrance with colorful umbrellas while children laughed as they jumped across puddles before disappearing into waiting cars. Within minutes the parking lot had emptied, leaving only the soft rhythm of rainfall tapping against the pavement. I stood beneath the front awning, adjusting the stack of lesson plans tucked inside my canvas bag before opening my umbrella and beginning the short walk toward my apartment only 6 blocks away. Halfway across the first intersection, something made me stop. A small boy stood alone beside the crosswalk, completely still despite the heavy rain soaking his navy blue jacket. He looked no older than 8 years old. His backpack rested neatly on both shoulders, and one small hand tightly held a folded drawing that the rain had already begun to blur. Cars passed carefully through the intersection, while adults hurried by without noticing him. He did not cry. He did not call for anyone. He simply stared down the long street as though he expected someone to appear at any moment. I slowly approached, lowering my umbrella so it covered both of us. "Hi there," I said softly. "Are you waiting for someone?" He looked up at me with remarkable blue eyes that seemed far older than a child should have. "My driver was supposed to be here," he answered quietly. "He has never been late before." His calm voice somehow made me worry even more. "Do you know your parents' phone number?" I asked. He hesitated before shaking his head. "I know my father's office number. He told me to memorize it." I smiled gently. "That is a very smart idea." We walked together beneath my umbrella toward a nearby coffee shop where the owner knew many teachers from the neighborhood. She welcomed us inside, handed the little boy a warm cup of hot chocolate, and allowed me to use the landline behind the counter because the storm had weakened the cellular signal. I carefully dialed the number he recited from memory. The phone rang only once before a calm male voice answered. "Moretti Holdings." I explained that I was an elementary school teacher calling on behalf of a young boy who had been left waiting outside during the storm. The voice on the other end immediately became more alert. "Is Noah safe?" he asked. I glanced toward the little boy as he quietly watched raindrops slide down the cafe window. "Yes," I answered. "He is completely safe." There was a brief silence before the man spoke again. "Please stay where you are. Someone will arrive within 10 minutes. I thanked him and ended the call. Noah looked at me with a small, grateful smile. "Thank you for not leaving me outside," he whispered. I smiled back. No child should have to wait alone in the rain. He unfolded the damp drawing still clutched in his hand. It showed 3 people standing together beneath one umbrella. The faces were simple, drawn with colored pencils, but one figure was missing a smile. Before I could ask about it, headlights reflected across the cafe window. A convoy of black luxury sport utility vehicles slowly pulled to the curb, and every conversation inside the coffee shop suddenly fell completely silent. The door of the first black sport utility vehicle opened slowly, and every conversation inside the coffee shop faded into complete silence. Even the sound of rain against the windows suddenly seemed distant. Several men stepped onto the sidewalk wearing dark business suits and discreet communication earpieces, yet none of them rushed inside. Instead, they respectfully stood near the entrance as though waiting for someone far more important to arrive. A moment later, another vehicle stopped directly in front of the cafe. The rear door opened, and a tall man stepped onto the wet pavement carrying only a black umbrella. His charcoal overcoat was perfectly tailored despite the storm, and his calm blue eyes immediately searched the room through the front window. They stopped the instant they found Noah. I watched the little boy quietly slide off his chair. His face brightened with relief before he whispered a single word. "Dad." The man entered without hesitation, removing his umbrella before crossing the cafe with measured steps. There was nothing hurried or dramatic about the way he moved. The moment he reached Noah, he knelt until they were at eye level. He gently brushed a damp strand of hair away from his son's forehead. Are you all right? He asked softly. Noah nodded. I am fine. She stayed with me. The little boy looked toward me while holding his folded drawing against his chest. The man slowly stood and turned in my direction. His expression remained composed, but gratitude was unmistakable in his eyes. Miss, he said respectfully, thank you for taking care of my son. I smiled politely. He was very brave. He simply should not have been alone in the rain. He nodded once before looking toward one of the men waiting near the entrance. Find out why the pickup schedule failed, he instructed calmly. I do not want this happening again. There was no anger in his voice. Only quiet responsibility. The employee acknowledged the instruction and stepped outside to make several phone calls. Noah reached for his father's hand before remembering the drawing still resting in his other hand. I made something today, he said shyly. He unfolded the slightly damp paper and handed it to his father. The drawing showed 3 figures standing beneath one large umbrella. 1 child. 1 woman. 1 man. The man studied the picture for several seconds before smiling gently. It is beautiful, he said. Noah lowered his eyes. I forgot to draw you smiling. His father looked at him with unexpected tenderness. Perhaps next time you will. I noticed the quiet sadness behind those words but chose not to ask questions that were not mine to ask. The coffee shop owner returned with a small paper bag containing fresh cookies she insisted Noah take for the ride home. The little boy accepted them with sincere thanks before looking back toward me once again. Will I ever see you again? He asked. I laughed softly. Maybe. The world is smaller than it feels sometimes. Before I could gather my bag, the man reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed an elegant business card. He placed it gently on the table beside my coffee cup. My name is Ethan Moretti, he said. If you ever need anything, or if I may repay your kindness, please call me directly. The name struck me immediately. I had seen it countless times in newspapers and television reports, always surrounded by rumors, speculation, and whispered conversations that painted him as one of the most powerful and feared businessmen in the city. Yet the man standing before me looked only like a father relieved to have found his son safe. Noah suddenly hugged me before stepping back with an embarrassed smile. Thank you for waiting with me, he whispered. I watched them leave together beneath the same umbrella, the little boy's hand safely wrapped inside his father's. As the convoy slowly disappeared into the rainy afternoon, I picked up the business card still resting on the table. The elegant black lettering confirmed everything I thought I knew about Ethan Moretti. Somehow, after meeting him for only a few minutes, I was no longer certain that any of it was true. The business card remained inside my wallet for nearly 2 weeks before I looked at it again. Life quickly returned to its familiar rhythm. Every weekday morning I greeted smiling students outside my classroom, helped nervous first graders learn their multiplication tables, supervised recess beneath colorful maple trees, and carried home stacks of papers waiting to be graded. The rainy afternoon with Noah slowly became one of those unexpected memories that quietly settle into the background of everyday life. Sometimes I wondered whether he was doing well. I hoped he had found reasons to smile again. Beyond that, I never expected our paths to cross. Then one Friday afternoon, everything changed. Our principal gathered the teachers in the faculty lounge after classes ended. She looked unusually excited as she placed several elegant invitation envelopes on the conference table. Wonderful news, she announced. The Moretti Children's Foundation has selected our school as one of 5 finalists for a major educational grant. Several teachers exchanged surprised glances. The foundation planned to renovate aging classrooms, modernize libraries, expand after-school programs, and create scholarships for students from families facing financial hardship. It was the kind of opportunity every public school dreamed about. Representatives from the foundation will visit next week, the principal continued. They want to observe classrooms, speak with teachers, and understand how we serve our students. I quietly opened one of the information folders resting on the table. The first page displayed a familiar name. Ethan Moretti. I stared at it for several long seconds before closing the folder again. None of my coworkers noticed. Throughout the weekend, I found myself thinking about the little boy in the coffee shop far more often than the foundation itself. I remembered the drawing he had protected from the rain. 3 people beneath one umbrella. One missing smile. Something about that picture refused to leave my thoughts. Monday morning arrived bright and clear beneath crisp blue skies. The school buzzed with excitement as volunteers arranged fresh flowers near the entrance, and students proudly displayed classroom artwork along the hallways. Shortly before 10 o'clock, several black sport utility vehicles entered the parking lot. Teachers quietly exchanged curious glances through classroom windows as professionally dressed visitors stepped outside carrying folders rather than cameras. When the front office announced their arrival over the intercom, I welcomed my students back from reading time and continued teaching as though nothing unusual was happening. A gentle knock interrupted the lesson 20 minutes later. The principal entered first, followed by Ethan Moretti. He wore a tailored navy suit instead of the overcoat I remembered from the rainy afternoon. Beside him walked 2 foundation directors carrying notebooks filled with questions about educational programs. Ethan immediately recognized me. A faint smile appeared before he greeted me politely. "Miss Carter," he said. "It is nice to see you again." Several students looked back and forth between us with open curiosity. I smiled warmly. "Welcome to our classroom." Before the principal could begin introducing everyone, another small figure slipped quietly through the doorway. Noah stood behind his father holding a large drawing folder almost as tall as he was. The moment he saw me, his entire face lit up. "I told Dad you were my favorite teacher before I even met you here," he announced proudly. My students immediately laughed, and even Ethan seemed briefly surprised by his son's enthusiasm. Noah hurried toward my desk before carefully placing a colorful sheet of paper in front of me. "I fixed it," he said with unmistakable excitement. I unfolded the drawing from the rainy afternoon. It was the same picture of 3 people standing beneath one umbrella. This time every single figure was smiling. For a moment I simply stared at the drawing resting in my hands. The 3 figures still stood beneath the same umbrella, but this time every smile had been carefully colored with bright yellow pencil, as though Noah wanted happiness itself to become visible. My students gathered around my desk with quiet excitement, admiring the picture while Noah proudly explained every detail. "The little one is me," he said. "The tall one is my dad. And the other one is you because you stayed with me when everybody else was busy." Several children smiled warmly before returning to their seats as the principal gently reminded them that the visitors had come to learn about the school. Ethan remained near the classroom door, watching Noah with an expression that revealed far more than words ever could. There was relief in his eyes, but also something quieter, something that looked almost unfamiliar. Hope. The foundation directors spent the next hour observing reading groups, science activities, and classroom discussions. Instead of interrupting lessons, they listened carefully while teachers explained how outdated resources limited opportunities for many students. Ethan asked thoughtful questions about literacy programs, special education support, after-school tutoring, and nutrition services. He took handwritten notes himself rather than leaving everything to his staff. Watching him move through the classroom, I realized he paid far more attention to children than to cameras or public recognition. Before leaving, he thanked every student personally for welcoming the visitors. Noah lingered near my desk while his father finished speaking with the principal. "Can I show you something?" he whispered. I nodded, and he carefully opened the large drawing folder he had carried all morning. Inside were dozens of colorful pictures. Most showed parks, libraries, classrooms, and gardens. Some included his father reading books beside him. Others showed only the 2 of them sitting quietly together beneath large trees. One drawing stopped me completely. It showed a woman standing beside Noah while Ethan smiled nearby. Above the 3 figures, Noah had written in careful handwriting, "Families can grow." I looked at him gently. "You drew all of these?" He nodded proudly. "Dad says drawing helps me remember good days." Before I could answer, Ethan joined us with an apologetic smile. I hope he has not been distracting you. Not at all, I replied. He is incredibly talented. Ethan looked down at the drawings before speaking softly. His mother loved painting. Since she passed away, drawing has become his way of talking about things he cannot always explain. Noah quietly slipped the folder closed and reached for his father's hand. The sadness in Ethan's voice lasted only a moment before he smiled again for his son's sake. As the visitors prepared to leave, the principal stopped me outside the classroom. Emily, she said, Mr. Moretti has invited our faculty to attend the Foundation's annual education gala next Saturday evening. They will announce the grant recipients there. I thanked her politely, assuming it was simply part of the Foundation's public outreach. Later that afternoon, as I organized books after dismissal, a gentle knock sounded at my classroom door. Ethan stood there alone. The busy hallway had already emptied, leaving only warm afternoon sunlight stretching across the polished floors. I wanted to thank you personally, he said. Not only for helping Noah during the storm, but for giving him something I have not seen in a very long time. I looked toward the colorful drawings still resting on my desk. He is the one who brightens every room he enters. Ethan smiled quietly before glancing toward the windows overlooking the playground where Noah waited with one of the Foundation directors. That is true, he admitted. But for the first time since losing his mother, he asked me this morning if his teacher would be there before he asked where we were going. He paused briefly before offering a cream-colored invitation embossed with elegant gold lettering. I sincerely hope you will join us next Saturday. I believe there is something you deserve to see for yourself. The cream-colored invitation remained on my kitchen table all week, catching the warm evening light each time I walked past it after returning home from school. I had attended educational fundraisers before, but something about this invitation felt different. Perhaps it was because I had already met the little boy whose smile seemed to matter more than any speech or public announcement. Perhaps it was because every newspaper article I read about Ethan Moretti no longer matched the man I had quietly observed inside my classroom. Saturday evening arrived beneath a clear autumn sky filled with soft, golden light. The annual gala was held inside the beautifully restored Moretti Children's Foundation, a historic building overlooking the city park. Crystal chandeliers reflected gentle light across polished marble floors while teachers, school principals, librarians, physicians, nonprofit directors, and community leaders filled the elegant ballroom with quiet conversations. There were no dramatic displays of wealth. Instead, the walls were decorated with children's artwork, scholarship photographs, classroom renovation projects, and portraits of students whose lives had been changed through educational opportunities. As I walked through the exhibition hall before the ceremony began, I stopped beside a large display featuring schools that had received grants over the previous decade. Each project included photographs showing libraries rebuilt, science laboratories modernized, playgrounds restored, and music classrooms expanded. Small handwritten thank you letters from children accompanied every display. One sentence caught my attention immediately. Thank you for giving us books that let us dream bigger than our neighborhood. I quietly read every letter before moving toward another exhibit. An elderly woman wearing a Foundation volunteer badge smiled warmly as she noticed my interest. Beautiful, are they not? She asked. I nodded. I did not realize the Foundation supported so many schools. She smiled proudly. Most people do not. Mr. Moretti prefers that the children receive the attention instead of him. Before I could respond, gentle applause echoed through the ballroom as the evening program began. Ethan stepped onto the stage wearing the same calm expression I had come to recognize. Noah sat in the front row beside several scholarship students, dressed neatly in a navy blazer with the colorful drawing folder resting carefully beside his chair. Ethan welcomed everyone with quiet confidence before inviting teachers, principals, and students to share their own stories rather than speaking about himself. One by one, educators described libraries saved from closing, after-school programs restored, students receiving college scholarships, and families finding hope through educational support. Ethan remained seated among the audience during every presentation, applauding alongside everyone else. Near the end of the evening, the foundation announced this year's grant recipients. My school was selected. Cheers filled the ballroom as our principal embraced several teachers while students celebrated nearby. Before the applause faded, Noah quietly slipped away from his seat and hurried toward me carrying his familiar drawing folder. "I have another picture," he whispered excitedly. He carefully opened the folder to reveal a new drawing. This one showed an old red brick school surrounded by smiling children planting young trees together. At the center stood our classroom. Above it he had written in careful blue letters, "Every child deserves tomorrow." My eyes filled with emotion before I looked toward Ethan standing only a few feet away. He smiled softly. "That sentence was his idea," he said. "He insisted it should become the theme for next year's foundation." Noah beamed with pride as I praised his drawing. Just then a television reporter approached Ethan requesting a brief interview. I expected another discussion about grants and donations. Instead, the reporter asked why someone with his reputation invested so much in public education. Ethan glanced briefly toward Noah before answering quietly. "Because the future belongs to children who deserve opportunities, not assumptions." His words lingered in the ballroom long after the cameras stopped recording, but I noticed something else that no microphone captured. Several people standing nearby exchanged doubtful looks, whispering quietly as they watched him. It was the first time I realized that not everyone believed the kindness I had begun to see with my own eyes. The conversations I overheard that evening stayed with me long after the gala ended. They were never loud enough to become arguments, yet they carried the quiet confidence of people convinced they already knew the truth. He donates because it improves his image. No one becomes that successful without making enemies. There is always another side of the story. I listened without responding as guests slowly departed beneath the warm glow of the foundation lights. On the drive home, I found myself thinking less about the rumors and more about everything I had personally witnessed. I had seen Ethan kneel beside his son in a crowded coffee shop without caring who was watching. I had watched him spend an entire morning listening to teachers instead of delivering speeches. I had seen children proudly show him drawings while he remembered every one of their names. Those moments felt impossible to fake because they happened when no cameras were recording. A few days later, our principal announced that the foundation had invited several teachers to visit one of its community learning centers before the renovation project officially began. The center occupied a beautifully restored brick building only a few miles from our school. When we arrived on a bright Tuesday morning, volunteers welcomed families carrying books instead of paperwork. Children filled reading rooms, art studios, music classrooms, and tutoring spaces with laughter and curiosity. Retired teachers mentored students after school while college volunteers helped younger children complete homework assignments. Everything operated quietly, efficiently, and without unnecessary attention. Ethan arrived about an hour later carrying 2 large boxes filled with brand new children's books. There was no formal entrance. No announcement. He simply greeted the volunteers by name before helping arrange books on empty shelves. Noah followed close behind carrying a smaller box that seemed almost too heavy for him. Before anyone could offer assistance, he smiled proudly and declared, "Dad said everybody helps." Several volunteers laughed warmly as Ethan gently took half the weight from the box without embarrassing his son. Watching the two of them work together felt surprisingly ordinary. During lunch, I joined several teachers seated beneath a large oak tree outside the learning center. Ethan walked across the courtyard balancing paper plates for volunteers who had skipped the buffet while helping children finish art projects. One elderly volunteer smiled as he approached. "You always remember who eats last," she teased. Ethan laughed softly. "That is because my mother reminded me that serving people comes before serving yourself." After lunch, Noah invited a group of younger children to join him in the art room. Curious, I quietly followed behind. Every child received paper, colored pencils, and markers before Noah carefully unfolded his own drawing pad. "Today we are drawing someone who helped us," he announced. One little girl drew her grandmother. Another child drew a firefighter. Noah immediately began sketching a classroom with colorful books lining every wall. When he finished, He proudly carried the picture toward me. This time there were no umbrellas. No rain. The drawing showed our classroom filled with smiling students reading together while I stood beside a bookshelf. Ethan appeared quietly behind us before looking down at the picture. "You have been drawing your teacher often," he observed gently. Noah nodded without hesitation. "She makes people feel safe." Ethan looked at the drawing for several silent seconds before meeting my eyes. There was gratitude in his expression, but also a quiet sadness that still lingered beneath the surface. Before either of us spoke again, two visitors wearing expensive business suits entered the learning center. One of the volunteers immediately grew uncomfortable. As Ethan calmly walked toward the newcomers, I overheard one of them say, "Mr. Moretti, the board meeting cannot be delayed forever. The media has already started asking difficult questions." Ethan's peaceful expression never changed, but for the first time I sensed that the world outside these classrooms was preparing to test everything I had begun to believe. The visitors remained inside Ethan's office for nearly an hour while the learning center continued its normal routine around them. Children laughed in the reading corner, volunteers prepared afternoon snacks, and parents quietly thanked tutors before heading home with their sons and daughters. Looking around, I realized something important. None of the families seemed interested in rumors. They cared only that their children had a safe place to learn. That simple truth stayed with me as I helped organize books before preparing to leave. Just as I reached the front entrance, Ethan stepped into a hallway carrying a folder beneath one arm. His expression remained calm, but there was a trace of exhaustion behind his eyes that had not been there earlier. "Miss Carter," he said politely, "I hope today answered some of your questions." I smiled gently. "It answered many of them." He looked through the large front windows where Noah sat outside reading beside a maple tree. "Unfortunately, not everyone believes what they can see." Before I could respond, one of the Foundation staff members approached holding a tablet computer. "Mr. Moretti," she said quietly, "another article was published this afternoon." Ethan accepted the device without changing his expression. He read the headline for only a few seconds before handing it back. "Thank you," he replied calmly. "Please continue preparing for tomorrow's board meeting." Curiosity lingered in my mind long after I returned home. That evening I opened my laptop and found the article circulating across local news websites and social media. The headline suggested that Ethan's charitable work existed only to improve his public image. The story questioned his motives without presenting evidence, repeating old rumors while ignoring the thousands of students who had benefited from the foundation. I closed the page feeling unexpectedly disappointed. During the past several weeks, I had watched him comfort his son, restore schools, encourage volunteers, and quietly support families without seeking recognition. None of those moments appeared anywhere in the article. The following morning my coworkers were already discussing the story in the teachers' lounge. Some believed every word. Others remained uncertain. One teacher finally turned toward me. "You have actually met him," she said. "Is he really the man everyone keeps talking about?" I paused before answering. I thought about Noah waiting alone in the rain. I remembered the carefully folded drawings, the restored libraries, the learning center filled with children, and the quiet way Ethan always allowed others to receive the credit. "The man I met," I replied honestly, "is a father who never forgets his son's smile and a person who listens far more than he speaks." The room became silent. Nobody argued, but nobody seemed completely convinced either. 2 days later, the Foundation announced an open community forum where educators, parents, volunteers, and local residents could ask questions directly before the annual board meeting. Reporters quickly confirmed they would attend. Our principal encouraged several teachers to participate since our school had recently received the educational grant. I decided to go, not because Ethan had asked me, but because I believed people deserved the opportunity to hear the complete story before reaching conclusions. When I arrived at the community auditorium the following evening, every seat was filled. Teachers sat beside parents, students beside journalists, volunteers beside business leaders. Television cameras quietly prepared near the back of the room. Noah sat in the front row holding another drawing folder on his lap while Ethan greeted guests with the same calm respect I had seen from the beginning. As the moderator welcomed everyone, one investigative reporter stood first and announced that she intended to ask the difficult questions many people had been waiting to hear. The entire auditorium fell silent, and for the first time since I had met Ethan Moretti, I realized that the next few minutes might change not only his reputation, but the future of every child whose education depended upon the foundation he had quietly spent years building. The moderator welcomed the audience before inviting the first questions from reporters, educators, and community members. The atmosphere remained respectful, yet everyone could feel the quiet tension filling the auditorium. Cameras pointed toward the stage while notebooks opened across the front rows. Ethan remained standing behind the simple wooden podium without prepared notes, greeting each speaker with the same calm expression I had come to recognize. The first several questions focused on scholarship funding, community partnerships, and the expansion of learning centers across the city. Ethan answered each one with clear facts, inviting several foundation directors to provide additional details whenever appropriate. He spoke less about himself than about teachers, volunteers, and students whose lives had shaped the foundation's mission. Then the investigative reporter stood once more. She thanked him for his earlier answers before asking the question everyone had been waiting to hear. "Many people believe your charitable work exists to improve your public image," she said. "How do you respond to those who question your motives?" The auditorium became completely silent. Ethan paused for only a moment before looking across the audience rather than directly into the cameras. "I understand why people ask difficult questions," he replied quietly. "Trust is not built through speeches. It is built through consistent actions over time." He reached beneath the podium and placed several large binders on the table beside him. "For anyone interested, every financial report, scholarship record, independent audit, and annual review completed during the past 15 years is available today for public inspection." A quiet murmur spread through the audience as volunteers carried additional document boxes towards several tables near the stage. Certified accountants, board members, and independent education advisors stepped forward to explain the review process that had governed every foundation project. Nothing was hidden behind closed doors. Every donation, every scholarship, every renovation, and every partnership had been documented with remarkable transparency. The reporter carefully examined several pages before nodding respectfully. Her expression softened, though she continued asking thoughtful questions. Instead of becoming defensive, Ethan thanked her for seeking clarity. Watching the exchange, I realized that confidence built upon truth never needed raised voices. During a short intermission, parents, teachers, and journalists gathered around the information tables reviewing reports together. Several educators quietly admitted they had never expected such complete openness. Others spoke with scholarship recipients who shared personal stories about opportunities that had changed their futures. Noah remained seated in the front row, drawing quietly inside his familiar folder. Curious, I walked over and sat beside him. "Working on another masterpiece?" I asked softly. He smiled and turned the page toward me. The drawing showed a large school surrounded by children carrying books beneath bright sunshine. Near the entrance stood teachers, volunteers, and parents welcoming every student through open doors. At the center, he had drawn himself standing beside his father. On the opposite side stood me holding a stack of books. Across the top he had written carefully, "The people who stay become family." My eyes filled with emotion before I looked toward Ethan speaking with several teachers across the room. At that very moment, the moderator returned to the stage and announced one final presentation before closing the evening. Ethan stepped forward once again. "Several years ago," he began, "my late wife dreamed of creating a permanent education center where every child could discover hope regardless of background or circumstance. Tomorrow morning, we will officially open that center." The audience responded with warm applause, but Ethan raised one hand gently before continuing. "There is one more announcement. The foundation has invited someone whose kindness changed my son's life to help guide the educational programs that will begin there." My heart skipped before he slowly turned toward where I was sitting beside Noah. Every person in the auditorium followed his gaze, and for a brief moment I realized that the simple decision to stop for one little boy in the rain had quietly led me to a doorway I had never imagined walking through. The applause lasted far longer than I expected, yet I barely heard it. I sat beside Noah holding his newest drawing while hundreds of eyes turned toward me. For a brief moment I thought there must have been some misunderstanding. I was only an elementary school teacher who had happened to stop beside a little boy standing alone in the rain. I had never imagined that one ordinary afternoon would lead me to this stage. Ethan waited patiently without placing any pressure on me. His expression carried the same quiet respect I had seen from the beginning, allowing me the freedom to choose my own path. Noah looked up at me with hopeful blue eyes before gently taking my hand. "Please say yes," he whispered. "The children will like you." His simple words made me smile through unexpected tears. I slowly stood and walked toward the stage as the audience welcomed me with warm applause. Ethan greeted me with a grateful smile before stepping aside so I could stand beside him rather than behind him. "Miss Emily Carter," he said, "showed my son kindness on a day when she expected nothing in return. That single decision reminded me that the strongest foundations are built by ordinary people who choose compassion every day. Our education center deserves leaders with that same heart." I accepted the invitation with quiet gratitude, promising only one thing. Every child who walks through these doors will know they matter. The following morning, sunlight filled the courtyard of the newly completed learning center as families, teachers, students, volunteers, and community partners gathered for the official opening. Children hurried through wide glass doors carrying backpacks, books, and bright smiles while colorful banners welcomed every visitor. There were music rooms filled with instruments, reading corners lined with comfortable chairs, science laboratories waiting for curious minds, and art studios where imagination covered every wall. Watching the building come alive, I finally understood that this place had never been about one family or one organization. It belonged to every child searching for hope. Noah proudly became our first student ambassador, greeting younger children at the entrance with the same kindness a stranger had once shown him during a rainy afternoon. He carefully carried his drawing folder everywhere he went, happily explaining each picture to new friends. One afternoon, several weeks after the center opened, he handed me one final drawing. I unfolded the page slowly. 3 people stood beneath a bright blue sky instead of an umbrella. Behind them rose the learning center surrounded by children reading beneath autumn trees. Above the picture Noah had written, "The best families are built by the people who never stop showing up." I quietly framed the drawing and placed it inside the entrance lobby where every visitor could see it. Months passed, and the center continued growing beyond anything we had imagined. More classrooms opened. More volunteers arrived. More scholarships reached students who once believed opportunity belonged only to someone else. Reporters occasionally returned, but their stories no longer focused on old rumors. They focused on classrooms filled with laughter, libraries filled with books, and children discovering futures they had never dared to imagine. One peaceful autumn afternoon, after the last students had gone home, Ethan and I stood outside watching Noah race across the courtyard with several new friends. Golden leaves drifted gently through the air just as they had on the day we first met. Ethan smiled quietly before speaking. "It is remarkable how one moment can change an entire life." I looked toward the front entrance where children continued leaving with books tucked beneath their arms and hope shining across their faces. Then I remembered the frightened little boy standing alone in the rain, and the simple choice to stop walking. Sometimes people believe extraordinary stories begin with extraordinary people. I learned something very different. The greatest miracles often begin with one ordinary act of kindness that refuses to walk away.